And welcome back. Back in Apex Predator, I made a video about the MiG-29 getting the R-73 and how that would really change the game if added, and the dev's performance of the R-73 was more than proof of it. It was near impossible to flare, had a comparable range to the AIM-9L, and the HMD allowed off-bore shots. Basically, if added, it would drastically change the meta-air RB at the time, shifting it towards the MiG-29, even without the R-27ER, because the R-27ER was added during a mini patch after the major update. So War Thunder took away the R-73, gave the MiG-29 the R-27ER, and yeah, while the ER is considerably the best and fastest missile in-game, MiG-29s are only hardlocked to having 2 R-27s only. The same is the case for the Ek-141. While it can carry 4 R-27s, the outer pylons are restricted to regular R-27s. However, with this update, a new top missile was introduced, and the PL-8 and its Israeli counterpart, the Python 3, was added to the J-8F, Kfir-C7, Kfir-C2, F-16 nets, and Coordnas 2000 respectively. The Python and the PL-8 are pretty decent missiles. 40G overload, good range, and decent flare resistance. And since this was added, there's been discussion about finally adding the R-73 for the MiG-29. Now, the question is it really time for the MiG-29 to get the R-73? The first thing to consider when talking about the PL-8 and Python 3 is the aircraft they were added on. As I've listed above, these are all aircraft with only IR missiles in their loadouts. The J-8F lost its PL-11s because this variant could not guide the missile, much like the Coordnas 2000 and the AIM-7F. As a response, War Thunder gave the J-8F 6 PL-8s as opposed to the maximum of 4 PL-8s before the PL-11 was removed. If the PL-11 was part of the loadout, only 2 PL-8s can be carried. This is a fair trade-off, especially when the plane is slated to fight in the radar missile meta. Yeah, the PL-5B is still effective, sure, but at 11.7 without a viable head-on missile, it leaves the J-8F sorely lacking. This would be the same case for the Kfir-C7 at 11.3. Now, can you say the same for the MiG-29? The MiG-29 has the R-27ER, one of the best missiles in-game in terms of top speed and acceleration. Carrying 2 of them, when applied correctly, would result in at least a kill every time. Yes, there are ways to defeat radar missiles even at a head-on, but defeating radar missiles are considerably more difficult than infrared missiles. The PL-8 and Python 3 at least evens the playing field against 12.0 aircraft with radar missiles, especially with Israel that won't get radar missiles until at least the F-15 Baz. And to be honest, the R-60M is also technically all aspect, no matter how little the range it has and how easy it is to flare. I'm going to use the phrase, if applied properly, when talking about the R-60M. In War Thunder's eyes, a fighter with good flight characteristics and a powerful radar missile can probably live temporarily with subpar infrared missiles. So, the next thing to consider is the performance of the R-73 itself. Based on the performance of the missile in-game, it seems the variant they chose to add is the R-73M. We know because it can pull 50 Gs, it has a 60-degree seeker field of view on off-bore sight, and a new seeker algorithm where it goes through the center of the aircraft rather than the hottest part of the plane or the engine nozzle. The latter part is the new ECCM and IRCCM suite of the missile to improve its flare resistance and resistance to IRCM systems. It is well noted the R-73M is comparable to the SRAM in turning speed and range. Of course, the ASRAM uses a charge-coupled imaging infrared guidance system, which is even better than the dual-band photo filter seeker used by the R-73M, but in terms of rocket motor, range, turning capability, they're pretty much the same, as compared to the base R-73 that doesn't actually have thrust vectoring nozzles, but rather uses deflector paddles like the R-60 and AIM-9s. Now, with all this technical mumbo-jumbo, let's try to answer the question whether it is time for the R-73 to be added to the MiG-29. For me, I think it's still unnecessarily completely to introduce such a missile, or at least the R-73 that War Thunder introduced during the dev server. If they introduce the base R-73 and R-73E, which has 40 Gs of pull and can be flared basically as easily as the Python 3, maybe I wouldn't be as opposed to it. Now the question is, when should the R-73M be added, or the R-73 that the dev server showed us? Perhaps when comparable missiles arrive, something like the Python 4, a Darter, and the PL-9 would be enough to necessitate adding the R-73M. Though I suspect thoroughly that the USSR and maybe China will get it earlier, perhaps around the time the Su-27 is introduced, with China getting the Su-27SK variant and the USSR getting the Su-27 and or the Su-27P variant. For NATO and US aircraft, they will struggle for a bit with the AIM-9L as their main infrared missile. The AIM-9M provides an illusion of flare resistance in theory, but in practice, the AIM-9M apparently fared horribly against the large caliber countermeasures used by Soviet aircraft. The real upgrades to the AIM-9M allowed it better tracking through clouds and terrain, with a new microchip allowing the missile to sort out false or background targets. However, Soviet flares lit up very slowly, and the optical filter could not distinguish the flares from the background. This problem would be fixed with the AIM-9M6 and the AIM-9M7. Basically, what they did in the AIM-9M6 and 7 was they tweaked the auto-gain feature that was on the AIM-9L. Maybe this is the AIM-9M variant that will be added, and it would be fine, so you could actually have the IRCCM needed. The only drawback is the lack of HMD capability. But with even more improved Sparrow variants to go with newer Sidewinders, maybe the AIM-7P is going to be added as a new upgrade to the AIM-7M. Although I'm not sure how the P variant has any significant upgrades that would make it better than the AIM-7M. Maybe tweaking its low altitude performance would make it significantly more powerful, as that is the primary drawback of the AIM-7s currently. But in all honesty, it seems that soon after the F-15 and Su-27, we will launch straight into AMRAAMs to give other nations a shot, with the JA-37D for Sweden receiving it, the F-16 MLU for China receiving it, and new aircraft like the F-4F-Ice for Germany, and the Tornado F-3 Capability Sustainment Program for the British, and so on and so forth. The question of what missile should fit which aircraft is a bit of a touchy subject to many ARB players. Oftentimes, it's used as evidence of bias against a single nation, highlighting the performance of the R-60M to indicate bias against Russia, while at the same time claiming the AIM-9L was nerfed because of bias against the United States. Personally, I don't subscribe to such ideas. These aircraft in question are still perfectly capable of performing up to par with the missiles they're currently equipped with. Most IR missiles require the same gameplay. It's generally best used when someone is distracted and is in no position to launch countermeasures. And with the case of the F-14A, all that's really needed is to shoot the F-14 in the rear hemisphere, and most of the missiles will ignore the flare trail. Such is the case with the F-4 and other really hot engines like the Tornado. Again, I say most missiles, but not all missiles. In terms of flare resistance, the R-60M is still dead last. The R-60 is also dead last in practical range after the missile physics update, where the magic missiles could still hit when launched from just above 2 kilometers. The R-60 cannot do a full maneuver and still hit at over 2 kilometers at low altitudes. There's no question that the R-73 will eventually be added for the MiG-29. As to when that will be, we just answered the question. No doubt that War Thunder knows that the R-60 is the worst performing missile at the 11.0 to 12.0 matchmaker and has plans to rectify that. But at the moment, as the MiG-29 seems to fare perfectly fine with 4 R-60Ms and 2 R-27s, it's not such a dire situation that will require immediate fixing. MiG-29 is still perfectly capable of competing at the 12.0 matchmaker. Only time will really tell what War Thunder has in store for these aircraft, so all we can really do is wait, you know? So that's what I think. Thanks for watching as always. This is the Dr. MD. Godspeed.